AFA with a gift, and we'll send you a free copy of the DVD, Desperate for More, The First Great Awakening. Go to afa.net/revival today.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Friday, February 20th, and we're going to take a little bit of a 30,000-foot perspective, as we often do on Fridays, about kind of the big picture instead of just the trending headlines, even though this ties into a couple of headlines, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio's speech that he gave in Europe. That was really phenomenal, and talking and incorporating the principles of the West and Western values, and really giving a cohesive summary of why conservatism and overall America's founding really matters, and was actually birthed out of the Western tradition and the European tradition. And we've been talking for a while in this program about how Islam and the rise of Islam and the infiltration of, other ideologies and other legal systems like Sharia law are invading the West. They're invading, obviously, Europe. They arguably have taken over Europe in some parts, and now there is a really big threat to America, which, of course, I would argue America is kind of the last stand for Western civilization. And so my good friend James Lindsay, who's a prolific author, and he has a lot of content on new discourses, was on PragerU this week talking about the question, are Western countries purposefully committing suicide to let China rise as a world power? And this is a fascinating question. So I invited James to come on this morning and talk about this here. If you haven't had an opportunity to see the fuller conversation on PragerU, I'd really encourage you to do that. But James, good morning. And I think this is an important question. So kind of, give us, set us up with where, China fits into all of this.
Yeah, China is always in the background. The way that I would like people to think about this is that it's just a piece of the puzzle. This sort of, if you're trying to draw out, I hate to use this phrasing, but the master plan, this is a major portion of the plan. And that major big picture plan is that China has been rising now for decades, ever since Mao Zedong died and was replaced by Deng Xiaoping in his new model that he brought in the late 1970s, early 1980s. China has been rising. We have mistakenly believed that China has incorporated capitalism, but it has actually incorporated National Socialism to drive its economic engine. And it has grown. Well, there's a model that says that when a rising power gets strong enough to come up against the existing world power, which is the United States and Western alliance, there's guaranteed to be war. This is called Thucydides' trap, which refers to the situation during the Peloponnesian War. And so the question has been for decades from State Department officials like Henry Kissinger and all of his associates going back to the Nixon administration and forward. The question has been, how do we avoid that war if China is going to rise? And one of the answers to that question would be, to open up trade routes. And the second answer to that question would be make sure the West is too weak to fight that war. And if we therefore adopt a degrowth model, an ESG sustainability model, we power ourselves with wind and solar, and we invite in lots of migrants or immigrants that are culturally different from us, or even jihadis that want to take us over from within, we weaken ourselves. We break apart our cultural unity, and we undermine ourselves economically and industrially so that we will not be able to compete when China becomes strong enough to try to claim the mantle. So being weak, we'll recognize our weakness, we'll recognize China's strength, and we'll pass the baton. This model is called the Century of Asia, or the Asian Century model, The idea being that there was a British century in the 19th, an American century in the 20th, and now it's China's turn to rule the world. And so the model is to weaken the West so that it will not fight the war when China gets strong enough to claim dominance, and we'll just hand off the power of global hegemony to the CCP.
Wow. And this is such a danger. And I think that the question, that was posed is that are Western countries purposely committing suicide? And the suicide of the West has, kind of long been a topic of conversation. And the recent focus in the headlines about Islam and, some of these obviously not Western philosophies and viewpoints and legal systems and all of that, Islam has really dominated the headlines. But is that, in your view, a little bit more of a distraction or just one of the tools that the West is using to commit suicide, but the broader, master plan, as you call it, or typify it, is really ultimately about China?
It's a tool, but it's also a partnership. China, the communist axis, if you want, Russia, have all this whole BRICS alliance have allied themselves with the Islamic world and more or less promised them the West as a prize. You can have all of the West if you help us take them off of the table. And so you kind of have this these two groups, the Islamic Crescent and the neo-communist axis, that do not get along with one another, but they're more than happy in the short term to overcome the West, to take the West off of the table as the player, global hegemony, to remove freedom from the world and democracy from the world and replace it with their models, and to split up the spoils, at least for a time. And, they can fight that out later. So what you find is that Islam and jihad in particular are being used as a tool. The Muslims very much want to take things over, just like the Axis communist program and the Far East wants to take things over. But in the short term, the West is in the way. And so they're willing, this is called the Red-Green Alliance, they're willing to partner and to split the spoils. So the West goes to Islam. Maybe this is why we see Canada trying to make a strategic alliance with China ahead of all this, to basically bet on it has these two options, and it's going to pick China over the Islamic Crescent as its natural ally. I don't know. But the point is to take down the United States. And this is a tool and a partnership that's being used to do it. Islam being completely incompatible, at least this fully politicized Islamism being fully incompatible with Western civilization, causes a division within our politics, a division within our culture, and the inability to fight for our country, not to mention sleeper cells, not to mention, many problems on the home front. And so it weakens us from within. It's just part of the bigger picture of making us unable to unify to stave off a fight with China, which, by the way, like I said, there were two routes to solving this problem. The other is to open up trade alliances with China, bring China into the developed world, and it is China that has decided not to participate in that in good faith. China has decided it wants domination, not to be a participant in the world stage, and so it's chosen the path of war, and we've led ourselves into believing that this war is therefore inevitable and that somehow China is not the one triggering it.
Yeah. And this is all just, so fascinating in terms of, kind of the broader strategy goals overall. And how do you think that the Democrat Party plays into this? Because we've obviously characterized them as communists, and a lot of them are, including Mamdani, who's kind of the most famous open communist. I mean, I think AOC can be fairly characterized as that. But really, while the Democrat Party suggests that they're pro-democracy, they're pro-constitution, and all of this, I think that they are actually working as enemies within, and they are for globalism. They're for, the rise of Islam, for the rise of China. I mean, they're actively working against the founding values that make this country great. How does that whole wing of American politics play into this?
What you said, there are a couple of different mechanisms, or maybe a few. Some of them are, like you mentioned, communists. Mamdani makes an interesting case because he's also Islamist at the same time. He's like the embodiment of the Red-Green Alliance. But the communists, if you read the last page of the Communist Manifesto, it's very, very clear why they will partner with Islam. It says on the last page of the Communist Manifesto that the communists will take the side of any revolutionary movement anywhere in the world that is against the current order of things. Well, Islam is against the current order of the West, so the communists will ally with them. And they have been allying with them for decades, going back to at least to the 1950s, probably earlier. These leftist communists, whether it's Jean-Paul Sartre from France, working with the Third Worldist Coalition, the Liberation Coalition, whether it's Angela Davis training for her radicalism, communist Angela Davis, Black Lives Matter, prison abolition queen, training with the Palestinian Liberation Organization in the Middle East. They've been working together for a long time. On the other hand, you have this spell of inevitability, whether it's the Muslims saying the jihad is in progress and it's inevitable, whether it's the communist axis saying this change in the world is inevitable, whether it's just the big globalists like the Davos set saying this change in the world is inevitable. You have a lot of people who are very opportunistic who've been told, look, you can't stop the change, but if you help us with the change, you'll be taken care of. If you resist us, you'll be destroyed. And these are, of course, big business leaders. These are politicians. These aren't everyday voting Democrats. But a lot of the Democratic Party has been captured by these dynamics in particular, and not to mention rivers of money coming from the Middle East and from China, and also direct infiltration. You'll see that direct infiltration, coming out in the news here and there. We find all of these Chinese operatives embedded within this, or this. You'll find the huge amounts of Qatari money or Iranian money injected into that. So they're purchased, they're captured, and they are working part and parcel with this, whether it's because they believe it's inevitable or it's because they've adopted the ideology or whether it's because their underlying leftist roots mean that they always ally, always, with whoever the revolutionaries are, even if those revolutionaries would draw scimitar and cut their heads off after the fact.
Wow. And it's mind-boggling, but at the same time, it really shouldn't surprise us, and it's nothing new. But then, in talking about the true motivations and the financial backing and all of this of the Democrat Party, we need to talk as well about the new right, because there is a huge segment of the right that I think can also fit into that mold that, whatever the current system is and the current institutions, the current thing, they want to be revolutionaries as well. And it doesn't matter if the revolution flies in the face of principles or of Western values, like this whole crazy, anti-Israel, America first means America only, kind of rhetoric. But it almost seems like the ideology of the new right is actually leftism, just by a different name.
Yeah, that's the only real question about this so-called new right is, are they just working for the leftists or are they actually leftists in disguise? Their operational tools are, in their own words, explicitly taken from Karl Marx's toolbox. They have an underlying critical theory in Marxist analysis. Again, they openly embrace postmodernism and a rejection of modernity, and traditionalism is done, therefore, in a postmodern, performative way. They say this again about themselves. On the other hand, you have this Carrie Prejean Bowler showing up to this Religious Liberties Committee meeting very, very visibly the other day, wearing a Palestinian flag on her blazer and saying that this is in fact a symbol of standard Catholic belief. So you have this agitation into the faith aspect that many conservatives root their worldviews on, so that they are getting confused. This is straight out of the Muslim Brotherhood playbook. I mean, it's very, very obvious that you're seeing plays that are used, whether it was straight out of the Muslim Brotherhood or even out of intelligence operations like the Arab Spring, in order to inflame those communities. So these playbooks have been run. The new right, or the dissident right, some people call it the woke right, are definitely playing their part. So they are a part of this axis against America. And I don't know exactly what they think they're going to get out of it. Maybe they've also been made promises. Maybe they're just getting paid in some cases. This change is coming, and it's going to be bad for everybody who doesn't help us, and you're invited to help us, and it'll be good for you, is a very powerful message for a lot of people. So, yeah, it's certainly another piece of this puzzle, so that the West is no longer under attack by just a red-green alliance, but now we have this red-green alliance plus its radical dissident right wing that's helping it in almost every regard.
And I'm speaking with James Lindsay, my special guest this morning, and this begs the question then, at least hopefully some on the right can be persuaded otherwise if, because a lot of them, and I see especially the younger demographic that's kind of going along with this rhetoric, they're doing it from a place that isn't totally as anti-America as the left. They're I think just convinced by this ideology and not actually thinking it through in terms of the strategy and the history that you're describing. And so what in your view is the most important, one thing, maybe multiple angles to try to fight to preserve the West and at least encourage people to not listen to, the antics of, the Candace Owens, Prejean Buller, kind of morons of the world, but to actually understand what's really going on in terms of the fight for the West?
Well, when we say this fight for the West, we've got to be very clear on what we mean by this fight for the West. And as Americans, what we actually mean is kind of the pinnacle achievement of Western civilization, which was the establishment of the United States of America and its Constitution. So what they need to do is start to look at the Constitution. What I'm seeing with a lot of these young men, in particular, in the conservative movement, is that through their faith in particular, or through agitation about the role of Israel in the world, what we might call the Israel question in parallel to the Jewish question, they're being rattled off of their belief in the classically liberal system that the United States represents and its Constitution consecrates. They're abandoning their covenant to that path, thinking that things have gotten so bad or so desperate that it just doesn't work anymore, that times have changed, and therefore the timeless truths in the Constitution were only for a particular people at a particular time who no longer exist, and we can't go back to that, so we need something new. And I would tell them that they misunderstand the situation. They're repeating propaganda straight out of the mouths of our enemies, whether those are Islamic, whether they're Chinese, whether they're Russian, and the goal is to divide us against our Constitution. The American Constitution has the model that is what we really mean by Western civilization. It is the model of freedom. It is the model of pursuing opportunity as you wish. It is not a model of failure or a model of weakness as they're being told. And that if we actually apply it, and we apply it intelligently, and we apply it creatively, and we apply it with strength and without apology, that it actually can solve all of these problems. So I think that is the direction that they need to look. So they need to study the things like the Federalist Papers. They need to study things like de Tocqueville and Adam Smith, these foundations of that system, and start thinking creatively about how to apply those in the 21st century to solve our problems rather than abandoning them and joining in the revolution.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so well said. And, this isn't just about America egocentrism. It's about, understanding the founding and how the Constitution was born out of a recognition of, all of these principles of the Western tradition and the Judeo-Christian founding, and then codifying this in a way for a system of government that made the most sense when applying all of those principles of freedom and liberty, genuinely looking at our rights being pre-political, instilled by God, our Creator, not the government, but also contending with a government that can get out of hand with, man's fallen nature, predisposition to power, and all of those things. And you're right that the Federalist Papers and also the Anti-Federalist Papers discussed all of this. And the Constitution is, the greatest system that has ever been devised by man. And we have to actually use that and preserve that. And I would argue that, as we've gone along in our nation's history, we're only 250 years old, we have perverted that in a lot of ways through the amendment process. I mean, a lot of the early 20th century amendments were, some of the worst ways that we've undermined ourselves. But this whole idea of preserving the West and ensuring that is linked inextricably with the constitutional order is something that also a segment of the right is trying actively to undermine, because they're suggesting that the Constitution is no longer like leftists. They're basically saying, well, this doesn't work anymore. We have to give the government more power, and we have to, forcibly push things like blasphemy laws, like the Christian nationalists say, or some of these other examples of of giving government more power, because they think that will ultimately accomplish their ends. But the problem in that, of course, is that only works when they are in power. And they don't see also the natural and historical conclusions of every other time that's been tried that ends up in a totalitarian regime. And so some on the right are actively undermining Western values of freedom and liberty and Christendom ultimately by suggesting that we need to even overhaul or replace the U.S. Constitution. So, what do you see for those segments on the right?
I've been reading some of their propaganda, or their arguments, if we want to be more charitable. I've been reading some of this lately. And so they make arguments explicitly like, Abraham Lincoln famously said, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And they make this argument very explicitly that it is not possible to have a government of the people. It's also not possible to have a government by the people. You can only have a government for the people. Therefore, every state, this is actually a conclusion they draw, every state is actually a totalitarian state, and it's just a matter of choosing which totalitarianism we want to live under. So there's this underlying fatalism that there is no possibility of a government or of a system that allows for self-government, that the experiment that the founders of the United States proposed, which was an experiment in self-governance, is not possible at all. It's actually a fiction, and us trying to commit to this fiction for 250 years has led us to this crisis point, not the agitations of communist regimes, not the willful insertion of jihad to undermine our system, not those things, but know that the system was flawed from the beginning because it is itself impossible. Every real state in the world will eventually be a totalitarian state unless it is very, very small. This is a genuine conclusion they draw, and they're using this to confuse young men into believing that these that the principles of the United States were always a lie. And this, of course, is the kind of propaganda that serves only one group of people, which is our enemies, the enemies of freedom, whether they're Islamist, whether they're communist, whether they're fascist, it doesn't matter. The enemies of freedom are the only people that this serves. And so, like I said, I've been reading their documentation, their own literature. These are explicitly the things that they argue. And they mean them, they believe them. And they're convincing other young Americans to abandon Americanism, to abandon America, and to abandon the Constitution to their own detriment on these lies. And it's very important for us to start to engage with these and show that these arguments are seductive but false, just like the arguments from the left are seductive but false, just like the arguments, if you read Milestones, which is the Muslim Brotherhood intellectual book, is also seductive but false.
Mm. And you're so right, James Lindsay, that we have to combat these worldviews and these false ideologies with truth and with the correct ideologies and the viewpoints and the Western tradition and understanding where the Constitution fits into all of this. Because, this is, like I said at the beginning of the program, this is maybe even wider than a 30,000-foot perspective, because we're, kind of even spanning not only American history, but but world history in terms of why all of this matters. And to connect some of these dots, we're already out of time for this morning, but to connect all of these dots is so important because especially for those on the right that have been captured by these false ideologies, it's even more important to persuade them, because I think that they're actually genuinely persuadable. Not some of these people who are the leaders of the movements, just like, the BLM Marxist leaders. They're absent, being saved and accepting Christ as Lord and having an actual regeneration experience. They're set in their ideology. They haven't just been taking capture with it, and they're going along with this sort of surface level. It's the same for some of these leaders on the right, but for some of the followers that don't actually understand not only the history, but also the future and what these ideologies lead to, and they don't see it in the bigger picture of this, those people, I think, can be persuaded. So, James Lindsay, I really appreciate you coming on today and for the work that you're doing at New Discourses. For PragerU, for putting out some of this content. This is why also, I've started to do more short form response videos on TikTok, Instagram, and some of these platforms to just call out some of these lies and the ideology, and hopefully drive, some of that audience back to listen to some of these long form conversations, because it's so important. But we will be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
How about this? Some actual good news on the healthcare front, even as costs just keep skyrocketing. So if you're 65 or older, MediShare now offers MediShare 65 Plus. Call them. You can talk to them about this. A lot of people are taking advantage of this now, because even if you have Medicare Parts A and B, there are out-of-pocket things, deductibles and copays that just keep going up. And the whole point is to help you by giving you a low, consistent monthly payment that fills in the gaps. In fact, I can tell you how much MediShare 65 Plus is. For example, it's $99 a month up to age 75. It keeps costs under control. That helps with peace of mind. MediShare is trusted too. It's been around for 30 years, and it's a community of people who help each other. Business owners, retirees, pastors, teachers. People love being part of it. Here's the number you can call now. They are easy to talk to. Call 833-45-BIBLE. That's 833-45-BIBLE. 833-45-BIBLE.
It's so easy to politicize abortion, but the reality is there's a precious life at stake, and that little life doesn't have a voice. All that little life has is a heartbeat, and it can be heard as early as 5 weeks on ultrasound. That's where Preborn steps in. Preborn is a voice for the little ones.
They do an ultrasound, and that's when everything changed. Because when I saw my baby, and when I heard her heartbeat, that was it.
Preborn Network of Clinics offers free ultrasounds to women in crisis while showering them with God's love. This powerful combination doubles a baby's chance at life and has helped to rescue over 300,000 babies. To learn more about Preborn's life-saving work, call pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 baby, or visit preborn.com/AFR. All gifts are tax deductible.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. Jesus is not welcome in a New York high school because educators say our Lord is not inclusive. Kennedy Canales is a student at Plattsburgh Senior High School. She petitioned leadership to start a Jesus Club. School leaders signed off on another kid's secular club, but the Jesus Club was rejected. Kennedy was told that her club was not inclusive. Instead, they recommended a more generic name like the Faith Club. They said the club could not be overtly Christian. Now, the American Center for Law and Justice now representing Kennedy. They say the school violated the Equal Access Act. Under the law, public schools must allow religious clubs equal terms. So if you let the non-Christians have a club, you got to let the Christians have a club. The law mighty clear. And the notion that Jesus is not inclusive is simply not true. The Bible clearly quotes our Lord as offering a personal invitation to everybody. Come unto me all who are weary and burdened. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And if that bothers you as a Christian, that China is rising and the question of whether Western countries are basically conceding and they're allowing essentially this dominant world power to rise, and that a lot of the things that we're seeing happening in Europe and other places are essentially conceding a lot of Western values and allowing for this world power to rise. For Christians, this maybe should perk up our ears a little bit about the questions that we've had in terms of eschatology, or the end of all things, the book of Revelation, because China is frequently identified by some who interpret the kings of the East in Revelation 16, verse 12 specifically, who march toward Israel for the Battle of Armageddon after the Euphrates River dries up, and due, to its growing military economic influence and the red dragon symbolism, many view China as a key end times actor. So, how do we view the current situation and current headlines, maybe in light of what they might forecast about the end of all things? Well, let's welcome in Joel Rosenberg, who is the host of the Rosenberg Report and also the editor-in-chief of All Israel News. And Joel, really appreciate you joining. It's been a minute since we've had you on the program. We've missed you, and so welcome back.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Jenna, and greetings from Nashville at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. And I'm happy to talk about anything and everything. We are on the brink of another major war in the Middle East between the United States and Iran. But boy, every capital in the world, not just Washington, is watching. Beijing is watching. Moscow is watching. They are watching what President Trump believes. They're watching what he does. They're watching how he reacts. And I think Christians should be watching, because there are geopolitical issues here. Obviously, there are religious freedom issues and persecution issues going on in Iran and the region. But there are also prophetic implications to some of these things, and I think that should intrigue all Christians.
Yeah, absolutely. And it should intrigue us, and we should obviously think about these things and talk through them from a biblical perspective, which means first and foremost a biblical view of government. We can talk about foreign policy, and when we get into questions like eschatology, that's a little bit different of a playing field, right? Because we don't know what the end times looks like exactly, and we do have the book of Revelation, which as someone who looks through the lens of eschatology with a literal revelation, it makes sense to me that God, as the author of all things, told us the literal beginning in Genesis, and then we have the scope of human history, and then he told us how things will end and what signs and signals we can perceive to know that he will be coming back in a literal second coming. And so as we're trying to navigate some of these issues as it relates to current headlines, I don't think that it's getting too prophetic to ask the questions, do some of the things that we're seeing now line up with the signs that Christians should be looking for? And you mentioned, Iran, and you mentioned, some of these headlines. I mean, we've seen what's going on in Israel over the last several years. And so how do you view this through the lens of Scripture?
Well, those are great questions, Jenna, and I would start by saying that I think too many Christians will take an extreme approach, one side or the other. Either there are people that wake up every morning and they think that every single thing that they're reading about, they want to jump to a conclusion. They want to see everything as imminent fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And that I would be cautious about that. That is not something that I think is always true. But the other extreme is Bible prophecy doesn't mean anything. Anyone's crazy who studies it or teaches it or tries to look at what's happening in the world to see, are there prophetic implications? There are way too many pastors who just completely ignore prophecy. But 27% of the Bible, Jenna, is prophecy. 27%, 1 in 4 verses. Half of those prophecies have already come true. a lot of them, most of them, are about the first coming of the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, who we died and resurrected, and we know is coming back. So that's prophecy is very, very powerful. So to ignore it is a huge mistake, and yet that's another extreme that people take, and they would say, "Oh, I'm not an extremist." Well, all right, I wouldn't use the term extremist, but it's a big mistake to just completely ignore or to become obsessed. Now, that being said, Jesus himself criticized people in his generation, saying, you basically, I'm going to paraphrase, but you watch the Weather Channel, you're curious about the signs of the sky and whether it's going to rain tomorrow or be stormy or a drought but so you watch carefully to what's happening meteorologically. Why are you not trying to discern these times? Why are you not trying to understand what's happening in light of Scripture, in light of prophecy? So that Jesus' admonition is to do it, just to do it soberly and soundly. Now, that puts us in. I absolutely believe we are living in the last days. The fact that Israel was reborn as a country in 1948 after some 2,000 years of not being a sovereign country and Jews living in exile all over the planet, that is so huge. And it's the fulfillment of numerous, literally dozens of prophecies, Jews returning from exile to resettle in the Middle East, in the land of Israel, the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the land of Zion, making the deserts bloom, rebuilding the ancient ruins, having a sovereign nation state. These are the biggest prophecies in history since the resurrection that have come true in our lifetime, and it's been our lifetime. So that's a big deal. Tucker Carlson might not like it. He might want to fly in and just sit in an airport in a VIP lounge for a few hours and yell at Ambassador Mike Huckabee. But nevertheless, this is a big deal, and it's important. But when you look at other things, like there are prophecies related to Iran. Jeremiah 49, the last 10 verses or so, say that God is going to get so angry at a last days, end times regime in Iran, which in ancient times was called Elam, E-L-A-M, that he's going to get so angry that he's going to bring judgment by using other nations to destroy the military offensive capabilities of Iran, destroy the king and his regime, the princes around him, and then restore the fortunes of Iran, meaning bless the people of Iran after God has used other nations to bring about regime change. Now, I want to be clear, Jenna. I don't know that this is the moment and that President Trump is going to be, the actor in which God is going to use to bring it about. But I'm watching that very closely. That's a set of prophecies that most people don't even talk about, much less preach about. But we may be seeing some of these things come to pass right now. Most of the offensive capabilities of Iran were destroyed last summer. By whom? By Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel and President Trump of the United States. And they may finish the job in the coming hours or days. That would be huge. And again, it's not that we leap. We don't have to speculate. We just study the prophecies, look at what's happened and say, is this possible? And if it is, then we have to say, wow, what does that mean for us individually, spiritually, our families, our churches, our own souls? If God is moving in history like this, shouldn't we take him and his word seriously?
Yeah, that's so true. And Joel, I really appreciate you framing this as why prophecy is important to Christians, because I think we tend to categorically sort of emphasize prophecy too much and look, for signs and wonders in literally anything, or probably more regularly in most Christian circles today, we almost ignore it too much as saying, oh, well, we're trying to read tea leaves or prophecy isn't as important. But this is a big part of theology. And you mentioned that, even the prophecies that have been revealed, and we've seen the fulfillment even in our lifetimes and in recent history. I mean, it's just proof that God is still moving, that He is telling us what to look for, and that we can expect His imminent return. I mean, and that's ultimately the goal of prophecy. First was to foreshadow the coming of the Messiah, and then when He came, it was fulfillment so that we could recognize and have confidence in who He is and who Jesus said that He is. And now
Absolutely.
we need to have confidence, in what the future also holds.
I would say, preach it, sister. I would add, a lot of American young evangelicals are turning against Israel. They haven't been well taught by their parents, grandparents, churches, schools, colleges, even Bible colleges and seminaries aren't teaching much about Israel, and that's a big mistake, because I can't think of a better apologetic right now in our lifetime than to tell young people who are struggling, is there even a God? And if there is a God, is the Bible really His Word? Is it really useful and trustworthy and relevant to our lives? The rebirth, the prophetic rebirth of Israel in 1948, and the Jews coming back to the land and rebuilding the ancient ruins and making the desert blue and all those things, this is the biggest apologetic to say to young people right now. I get that you're struggling with whether you believe there's even a God, but the only book in the world that told us that Israel would become a sovereign nation state again after thousands of years of not being one is the Bible. How could God have known that if He doesn't exist? How could the human writers of the Bible know that something that's completely impossible would happen? And it has happened. And I happen to live there, and I see, that we joke in Israel that the national bird is the crane. And we say that because there are cranes everywhere building new buildings all over the country. It's like the reconstruction of the land and state of Israel is happening right now. I'm not saying that every Israeli leader is doing everything right, that I agree with all that, or that Israel isn't making mistakes, that most Israelis don't know their Messiah yet. No, those are all real issues. But to not talk to young people, but all Christians, God is moving. Like, do you realize that things that were completely, insanely impossible for 2,000 years they exist now, and the headlines that you read about, that Tucker hates us, that Candace Owens says Israel's a demonic nation, that Megyn Kelly, Nick Fuentes, all these people, the fact they're talking about an Israel that exists, whether you agree with it or not, is Bible prophecy in motion. It shows us that there is a God, and that the God of the Bible is that God, and the Bible really is His Word. There's no other way to explain it. And that's exciting. And we're really robbing young people of beginning to think that way. I can't think of any other topic that you could have an immediate, short conversation with a young person and say, this is one of the main reasons I believe there's a God. How else would you explain all this? And and then there's the urgencies of every day, where you think, wow, we may be at war by the time this airs. That Trump may have made his move, but the point is, even if you set aside the prophetic side of Israel, just say they're our best ally. And President Trump is not making decisions for Israel. He's making decisions to defend America first, but not America alone. There are 700,000 Americans who live in Israel. There's no country in the world where more Americans live outside of America than Israel. So if Iran has been firing hundreds and thousands of missiles directly and through their terror proxies at a country that has more Americans than any other country in the world, shouldn't the United States, the American president, defend American interests, American lives, American security, as well as our Arab allies, as well as energy, freedom, and independence? And that's what President Trump is doing in a way that no other American president has ever done. And I've had criticisms of President Trump on various areas. You have. But he is he is rocking it out right now in bringing down the literal number one most deadly enemy against the United States in 47 years. Iran has killed more Americans directly and through its terror proxies than any other country since the Vietnam War. And so the idea that we shouldn't be dealing with Iran, that he shouldn't be, yeah, good. Try to make it a diplomatic solution if you can. I don't think you can.
Yeah,
I don't think
I think
this is a murderous regime.
Absolutely.
So
and we need to take a
the
break
point of
here.
decision.
He is, and he's at the point of decision. We need to take a break here, Joel Rosenberg. We're going to come right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Life can be hard, but we have to keep our eyes focused on Jesus. I'm Christy Graham, host of On the Ground with Samaritan's Purse, and I want to encourage you in your walk with God. Listen each week as we go behind the scenes of our work around the world. You'll be challenged and encouraged in your own faith as you hear how God is actively changing lives. Join us for On the Ground with Samaritan's Purse, Sundays at 8:30 a.m. Central, right here on American Family Radio.
If we lose this cultural war, we're going to have a hedonistic, humanistic society.
Discover the story of the culture warrior Don Wildman and how he went head-to-head with Hollywood, Playboy, the homosexual agenda, and the Disney empire. The movement Don started paved the way for Christians to boldly stand for truth and righteousness in a hostile culture. Watch Culture Warrior today for free. Visit culturewarrior.movie.
And seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. From a distance, the fig leaves gave Jesus the impression that there was fruit on the tree. Upon closer inspection, the tree was fruitless. Perfect church attendance and ministry activity cannot replace actual Christ-like fruit produced in our lives. From a distance, it can appear as though we're bearing fruit, but what would we find with a closer look? Are we content with fruitful appearance, or do we yearn for the real thing?
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you're just not happy with what you've got, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and it's proven for more than 30 years it is proven. And we know this from member surveys. People love it, which is why it's grown to hundreds of thousands of members across the country. One big factor, besides the peace of mind that comes from being a MediShare member, the savings is tremendous. It is not atypical for a family of four switching to MediShare to save more than $8,000 a year. It is a difference maker, and you can get 24/7 telehealth. You get access to more than 1 million providers and hospitals. There are flexible options, too, for your budget. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You could join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. Here's the number. 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE. 833-44-BIBLE.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back, and I'm still here with my guest, Joel Rosenberg, who is the editor-in-chief of All Israel News and also the host of the Rosenberg Report. And in the last segment, Joel, you were talking about President Trump is at a decision point with Iran, and how Christians need to be paying attention to what's going on in the world, particularly in light of Scripture. We do need to be thinking about what the signs may forecast in terms of being just ready for the imminent return of Christ. And, this really does tie into this whole question that is just bizarre right now that is cropping up particularly among young people and kind of a certain segment on the right of being basically anti-Israel. I mean, very anti-Semitic. And it matters that churches correct that false theology. because it matters that we believe the truth about what the Bible says. And unlike what some very prominent people are suggesting, that, the Christian faith doesn't require an acknowledgement and a love of Israel. I mean, that's just absolutely false. And so where do you see this heading in terms of the Republican Party overall? Because Trump has been a friend of Israel, as you very well know, even more than me. And yet we're kind of seeing this split.
Well, I am certainly concerned about the Israel derangement syndrome that we're seeing inside Tucker Carlson and obviously a neo-Nazi like Nick Fuentes that Tucker teamed up with, but others, Candace Owens and Megyn Kelly, and now this Carrie Prejean Bowler and others are sort of being drawn into these deranged attacks against Israel. Now, there are legitimate questions about Israel. Don't get me wrong, and we're happy to answer them. And you just made a really great point. Yes, I'm concerned about the possibility that what's happening is Tucker and others are firing essentially political cruise missiles into the Trump coalition by trying to attack evangelicals, especially the vast majority of evangelicals love Israel, and they may or may not call themselves Christian Zionists, but if they believe Israel has a right to exist and be safe, and most evangelicals do by far. But Tucker is saying that we have a brain virus, that we believe in heresy. This is Tucker Carlson, who last year said he'd read through the Bible for the first time in his entire life. So somehow now he's a theological expert and tells us that we believe in heresy, even though Jesus was Jewish and he was an Israeli and all this. But the point is that Tucker and his team are trying to blow up the MAGA coalition, and that will devastate literally, if the Trump coalition blows up, all pro-life, pro-family, conservative, pro-growth policies in the House, in the Senate, and the White House, they're going to be reversed, and then we're going to go back into Biden, Obama, Kamala Harris country. I mean, Zohran Mamdani, that world, that's the alternative. And so Tucker is playing a much more dangerous game than I think people realize. It's not just about Israel. That's one point. Second point is, you made a really important point, but almost in passing, that churches are not teaching this, and we need to respond. But we shouldn't be it's sad to have to respond to anti-Israel sentiment, because Israel shouldn't be only a political issue. At first and foremost, for Christians, it's a theological issue. God starts this process of saying, I'm going to choose the Jewish people and bless them and give them a land. This starts in Genesis 12. And God says that I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. In just the 12th chapter of Genesis, he's already laying down look, this is so important to me. There's a set of blessings that come with understanding Israel and the Jewish people, even if you don't agree with us all. Okay, but understand this is important to me. This is a project I'm doing, God says, and I want you to be part of it. I want you to be a blessing. And if you don't, if you live in curses, there are consequences. Third, I would say, 162 times in the Bible, 162 times the word Zion is mentioned. And Zion it sounds like a political term now, Zionist, but Zion is actually a mountain right in the center of Jerusalem. And it's a mountain that God says, that's my mountain. I live on that mountain. I love that mountain. I draw my people to that mountain. I've given that mountain to the Jewish people. When I kick the Jewish people out for being chronically disobedient, I'm bringing them back. Where? To Zion. And Isaiah 62 tells us, as believers, people who love the Bible, for Zion's sake, I will not be silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not be quiet. Meaning, and then it goes on to say, until what? Until everybody in Zion, everybody in Israel does know the Lord, does know his word. And that should be our heart, not only to bless Israel and the Jewish people against anti-Semitism, against a seven-front war, against all this nonsense.
Absolutely.
But also bless us so that we can listen.
And Joel Rosenberg,
really
we gotta leave it here. We're up against the end of the show, but it's so true. We've got to take our theology from the Bible, not from people who just learned about the Bible 5 minutes ago. As always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna at afr.net.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.